Hi, welcome back to another episode of Teddy Talk. And we're joined today with Dr. Riana Betzler, who is one of our faculty and residents here in housing, as well as a faculty member in the philosophy department. I want to give her this opportunity to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Dr. Riana Betzler, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy, and I'm really excited to be a faculty in residence this year as well.
Well, welcome, Riana. So let's start with this piece with your experience in terms of being a faculty member. What drew you to wanting to become a faculty member and also the field of philosophy?
Yeah, so in terms of what drew me to wanting to become a professor, wanting to become a faculty member, I've always really loved reading and writing and research and kind of following a question down to its natural end and kind of letting myself go down a rabbit hole and just think through different issues. And so I didn't exactly realize that that was a career path until I got to college and I encountered some of my professors and realized that this is not only do they teach, but this is also what they do. They get to sit and read and write and talk to various people and just think about ideas. And so this seemed like a really attractive kind of career path. And I just continued on. I did my master's and then my PhD, and I just really kind of fell in love with that and eventually got the opportunity to do some teaching, and also realized that I really love teaching as well, and seeing an idea just light up for my students and communicating ideas, and also helping them to grow their own projects and their own passions. So that's kind of how I got into it. In terms of how I got into philosophy specifically, I actually did my undergrad degree in psychology, and I thought that I maybe wanted to become a psychologist or maybe even go to med school or do research psychology or something like that. I always have loved science. And then I was also taking all of these classes in history and in philosophy, and this gave me the opportunity to really explore some of the ideas in psychology from a different angle. And I found myself asking these questions in the lab about how we interpret our data, or kind of what the consequences of our data are for society, that I realized were actually philosophical questions. And I was reading all this stuff about the history of science too, that made me kind of question some of the assumptions that we were making about the kinds of results that we were getting in the lab. And so I ended up just shifting a little bit more into philosophy and into history and philosophy of science. And that's my main area of study right now. And this gives me a way to have one foot in the science world. So I still read a lot of science, I still talk to a lot of scientists and psychologists, but I get to think about it from a different angle, from a more meta level perspective, and from a more historically informed perspective too. So it just sort of fell into place, honestly, for me, the philosophy side of things.
Really interesting, the whole essence of exploring and following down that question. Maybe if we go a little bit further down in terms of asking questions, then how do you, what advice would you give for some of our students that are trying to find, what is their passion area? How do they utilize their passion into the things that they do here in college, or how do they be successful, or where do they find that passion?
Yeah, this is such a great question, and I think it really ties into the connection between the classroom and then your life outside of the classroom. Like, what exactly is the connection between those two things? And for me, those two things are really deeply interconnected. So I find that a lot of my research passions are driven by things that I notice in my environment or in my day-to-day life. So things that I kind of read about in the news, or that I'm thinking about in terms of interpersonal interactions, sometimes with my friends or with my family. As I said, I started out in psychology, so I've always been really interested in what's going on in other people's minds and how we can know about that. And so one of my main research topics right now is about empathy, which is really about this kind of question about how we know what other people are thinking and feeling. And this is something that I think has a lot of societal ramifications as well. People talk about the importance of empathy for various social and political aspects. And a lot of the time, things that I'm reading in the news or stories that I hear from my friends are things that I'm always thinking about when I do my research. And then I'm thinking about how psychological methods like questionnaires or like interviews shed light on what other people are thinking and feeling too, and how that process is different from the kind of everyday process we go through with empathy. So I would say try to think of your environment and your day-to-day life as really inspiring your passions and your research questions. Don't be afraid to bring in things from even, fiction that you might be reading, or I don't know, whatever kinds of hobbies and activities you might have into your thinking in the classroom, and try to make those connections to deepen your understanding of the classroom material, and then use that classroom material too to deepen your understanding of your everyday world. And so for me, the two go hand in hand, and they really inspire and inform one another.
That's really interesting to hear, especially you're talking about that, building that bridge earlier of passion and kind of your studies. And then if we dig a little bit more then in terms of, as you're talking about some of those pieces, sometimes what we come up with in terms of successes, there's always failures or things that go our way. How do we build that sense of resilience to come back after something that doesn't go right, or if that inspiration somehow disappears? How do we overcome some of those pieces?
Yeah, so I think that there are actually maybe a couple of questions embedded in your big question. So one of the things that you said is this case of inspiration sort of disappearing. And for me, that's only really happened at times when I'm feeling really burnt out, like when I'm pushing myself way too hard, I'm not taking breaks, and I'm actually not giving myself the time or the space to be inspired to do the other things that kind of inspire or provide creative input. And I'm just trying to be in my office all the time or on my computer all the time and write my papers or something like that, and kind of have tunnel vision. So I find that in that case, when it's a case where you're feeling that the inspiration is kind of dying out, it's really a case of burnout, at least in my experience. And that what I need to do in those kinds of cases is take a step back from my computer and kind of go out for a walk, or go to the art gallery, or go talk to a friend, go see a movie, go read a novel, go do something that provides me with creative input and provides a way to think about the question from a different angle. And sometimes that can just re-inspire you and you come back refreshed. Sometimes I find if I'm really stuck when I'm writing a paper, I just need to go out for a swim, or I need to go for a run, and my brain's kind of working on the question in the background. Or maybe I see something on my walk home that I'm like, oh, that's such an interesting billboard with such an interesting way of putting this particular question. Maybe I can use that as a hook into my question. So I think really I would encourage students to make sure that you're getting a lot of other forms of creative input. Don't be just totally tunnel vision stuck in the library all the time. And for me, that's a way out of the kind of burnout type of, a way of building resilience against burnout is to cultivate different ways of being creative and to look at a question from different angles. Now, of course, sometimes you might just have kind of let a question run its course. If you're towards the end of a project, sometimes you're just sort of fed up with it. And that just means you need to kind of push through, get the project done, and then think about, okay, what's my next question that I'm going to follow up on? So it kind of depends where you're at in the process. The other part of your question, though, is about cases where we feel like we're failing or something. Like maybe you try really hard to write a great paper and then it gets rejected, or it doesn't get as good of a grade as you want, and you feel like this is something that's really important to you, but you're just really struggling. And for me, when I've experienced that kind of thing and needed to build resilience in those sorts of instances, my community is so important. So I really try to cultivate a community of good friends and colleagues and peers who, are willing to just help me work through those things. So I can go and talk to them. I can be vulnerable with them and say, this is really important to me and I'm really upset that this got rejected, or that I feel like I failed this, or I didn't get as good of a grade as I wanted to, and I don't know what to do. And I can kind of talk through it with them, and they can help me figure out what the next step is, what the next plan is. But also a lot of my friends and colleagues are there to work with me. So I have a writing buddy who we exchange drafts with each other at the end of every week, and we sometimes just sit on Zoom and we just write together. And having that solidarity and that community has been so crucial for building resilience, and also for knowing that other people have failures too, and that it's not just me, and other people who are willing to be vulnerable with you as well. You can kind of support each other and make sure that you don't feel this imposter syndrome or feel like everyone else is doing great but I'm failing, and that can be a really isolating position to be in. So cultivating a really good community of people who are mutually supportive, for me, that's been absolutely crucial in building resilience.
So speaking about that, how do you build that, or how do you cultivate that community that supports you and helps kind of wrap you?
Yeah, I think this is kind of a hard question, because I think it's a little bit of a process of trial and error to be able to find your community, especially when you're new to an environment and you don't know that many people. I know at my first year of college, this was something that I struggled with a little bit, because everyone seemed like they were doing great. Everyone seemed like they were really polished, and like it was like they weren't struggling with anything at all. And that's an external facade that I think sometimes people put up. And for me, what it was actually, to some extent, it was meeting people in some of my classes in my study groups who were kind of showing up to office hours a lot of the time. So office hours are great to go to. Your professors are there to help you, and they can help you build these kinds of communities and connect you with other students who are working on similar things. And so I actually was struggling with a chemistry class, for example, in college, and I met one of my best friends through that, who was also we were at office hours together, and she was like, I don't get this. And I was like, I don't get it either. And so we could then sit down together and both admit that we were struggling. And so some of that will happen kind of in the classroom, facilitated by your professors, and definitely lean on them, and don't be afraid to reach out to other students and say, hey, do you want to study together? And just try to create some of those mutually beneficial relationships in that way. And then the other way that I found my community was by trying out various different extracurricular activities and seeing which ones were really nourishing to me and which ones were providing me the kind of creative input that we just talked about. So some of those things for me were like dance groups, but then I also got involved in a lot of volunteering opportunities to get out into my larger community and to feel like I was giving back. And since I was a psychology major, I mostly worked in mental health clinics and things like that. And that was hugely inspiring to my research, but also gave me a group of people who were interested in similar kinds of questions and who were also very thoughtful and reflective about similar sorts of things and who were mutually supportive. So I would say do extracurriculars, try to meet different people and see where you fit and where you find those really nourishing communities, and go with your gut feeling about when a community is nourishing and when a community is a little bit exclusive, and stick with the ones that are nourishing. So it is a little bit of trial and error, but I think don't be afraid to be vulnerable as well and say, hey, I'm struggling with this. Do you want to try to meet up? And 9 times out of 10, the other person's also struggling with something too, and they're just trying to get by, or maybe not necessarily show that outwardly.
You gave a lot of great advice there, especially going to office hours, the study groups. What, as we're coming towards the end of this video, what other kind of recommendations can you give to our students for them to be successful here?
So office hours are great, study groups are great, writing groups, as I mentioned, are really great. I would also say go to the library. So librarians are amazing, and they know a lot about where you can find different resources and how you can do your studying and your research if you're working on a paper or something like that much more effectively. And they're usually really friendly and helpful. And so I really relied very heavily on the librarians when I was in college and all through my PhD as well. So I would say go to the library, and it's a nice, welcoming, quiet space, and librarians are amazing. So that's another small thing. What other pieces of advice do I have? Another thing that I would say is to give yourself a chance to explore and to put yourself a little bit out of your comfort zone. So you may enter college thinking that you are going to be doing one thing, that you kind of have this idea for a specific career path, but you may actually take a class that inspires you in a different direction. And don't be afraid to take classes that are a little bit outside of your comfort zone, or same thing, try an extracurricular activity that's a little bit outside of your comfort zone and give yourself a chance to learn and grow and explore. And then just in general, I think having a growth mindset, thinking about it as a journey and thinking about it as a learning process, is really helpful for building that resilience too, and for overcoming setbacks, because you can think of the setback as just one small part of the journey that you can learn from, rather than something that is an indicator that things are going terribly wrong or something like that. So I think cultivating that kind of growth mindset and that exploration mindset is really important too.
Thank you for that. And speaking of journeys, you've become a faculty in residence, or FIR. Tell us about that journey for you. Why did you become a FIR? And what was that journey like?
Yeah, so why did I become a FIR? Well, basically, so we've been talking a lot about this, what it's like to be a college student, how to succeed in college. And for me, the transition from high school to college felt like this really big transition that was in many ways kind of difficult and intimidating, even though it was also extremely rewarding and exciting. And it was the first time away from home, the first time kind of having to manage all of the details of my life, including things like laundry and just like taking care of myself on a day-to-day basis, and also trying to do really challenging schoolwork at the same time and make totally new friends and live with a totally different group of people away from my family and things like that. So this was a really big transition for me, and it was really exciting and rewarding, but there were also a lot of challenges to it. And as I said earlier, I think finding community is really important. And we had something like faculty and residence members as well, and they were really great at being there to bridge the gap between the residential life of college and also the academic life, and also just there as friendly faces and sort of supportive people who you could go and talk to and who had events that helped to create these kinds of communities, whether they were study groups or whether they were like one of my professors, his wife was actually a dessert chef, and so she would make us these amazing desserts and things like that and hold these dessert sessions. And so this is all a very rambling way to say that I wanted to become a faculty in residence so that I could help to facilitate and to create these communities and to make sure that the transition from high school to college or from commuting to living in a residential setting is just easier, and that students can build those connections, build those nourishing communities more easily. And so I really wanted to participate in trying to give back and to help facilitate the creation of those kinds of good communities.
That sounded amazing, especially with the desserts.
Yes.
Well, as we wrap up, maybe for some of our students watching, they're thinking about psychology or maybe thinking about exploring other fields with their majors, how would our students get a hold of you, or what is the best way for them to reach out to you?
The best way to reach out is by email, and my email address is just riana.betzler@sjsu.edu. So you can always reach me there. And then eventually, also office hours are great. I will know more about exactly when my office hours are in about a month's time. And, I'm new here, so I don't exactly even know where my office is.
We will make sure we include the email in the information that we share. With that being said, thank you so much for spending the time with us, getting to know you a little bit more, and definitely, especially sharing those great insights about how to build and cultivate that sense of community. I think it's really going to be helpful for all of us as we try to build resilience. Thank you so much for today, and I'm sure we'll find time to chat some more.
Thank you so much.